All right, I guess I'll go ahead and get started with introductions. So, Dave Marquardt, School Board.
Cassidy Bjorklund School Board.
Brandon Looney.
Kristen Damer, Assistant Superintendent.
Ashley Evans, Human Resources.
Cam Wingenbach, Director of Business Services.
Sarah Martin, Member Rights.
Jim McFarland, Vice President.
Karen Taylor, Negotiations Chair.
Michelle Dunn, Secretary.
Julie Reno, Research Chair.
Christine Berg, President.
Minutes. Any concerns with the minutes? Or are we ready to sign?
Not other than those that I put in the comments.
Okay.
It's pretty minor.
Yeah. So here are our papers, our tree for the day. Just note that everything is stapled but the first page, because of course I made an error and then had to go back and pull that out of the stapled page. So they are all separated. This one is yours. This is my okay. Okay, so we will start with we have an updated proposal for flex time. And so if you look at 3, we identified the specific purposes that could be utilized for flex time. So the intent would be to continue to use the form and have drop downs for those specific areas, as well as likely the ability to comment and identify. So for community involvement, what does that look like? Or what are some of those options? We just looked at number 4. I just bolded that time and then identified in D that these days are utilized on calendar days assigned unless otherwise noted above for the 25, and it should say 25-26 school year, so I apologize for that. This will include June 1st, 2026, as well as the early outs for September, November, March, and May. And then the other item that we had discussed last time was potentially the difficulty of the building administration approval. So in 5, approval B took out the pending building administrator approval. Teachers shall be responsible for entering their flex time in the district Google form, and that building and program administration will review flex time monthly in order to support teachers to revise if an identified item does not meet those requirements. So that one would need to be adjusted for a couple other things as well, but I think to respond to some of the concerns that were brought forward, we wanted to put that forward as well. And in addition, and we'll cover both of these together and then ask if there's question, an update to the PLC communities MOU, which hadn't been brought forward. There was a request or a discussion last time about maybe that the pay was not commensurate with the time, and following up with teaching and learning, they continue to feel that basing it around the $36 as it's assigned right now for the amount of time that those positions are doing on a quarterly basis. And they might be doing time in between there, but with the meetings and the work that was still, they felt relevant, but adjusted potentially up to 927 versus 900 for those positions. And outside of dates, that is the only change. And we know that those two, there is some connection, which is why we wanted to present them together. We also are aware that there is some further discussion with departments and leadership about those in particular. So we understand, we just wanted to put those on the table to make that a part of the discussion as well. I thought that would be helpful. Any questions? I should note too, like, our team did talk, and if there are clarifying questions or questions that we don't feel we can answer at the table, we might just take the questions and then come back after caucus as we go through. Sometimes we have the conversation at the table, sometimes we need to go back and find more information. And I'll just put that up front for us as we get started. So then, of information on that. That benefit is catalyzed, and we followed up with our brokers. And there's a couple of things. It's a voluntary benefit. It's really a benefit to help our plan, not necessarily to help the individuals on the plan. It's a claims management tool, and similar to some of our other plans, such as the minimum value plan, which isn't in a contract. We would consider this the same. So it's comparable to a program like Healthiest You, which is a benefit, but not a benefit that we would enshrine in a contract. And we have approximately 19 teachers who use this benefit as it sits. We both have early retirement proposals today, and Karen and I did not talk about this, so we'll see what we like together.
Kristen, can we go back a second?
Yeah.
I don't think we have a copy of that last one you talked about.
No, there's
Oh,
no
there is
copy of it.
Oh, there's
No,
not.
it's just a statement. It's not in the contract, Dave, and yeah. So Article 36, to our knowledge, we believe there may be one person left on this benefit. So from a district perspective, it would be our, and this should be in your packet, it would be our recommendation that we change Article 36 from early retirement policy to the deferred compensation plan, and that we leave sections 1, 3, 1, which is 3, 1, get rid of 2, section 3, section 4, in that article, and move section 2, which is specific to early retirement, either into an appendix or an MOU. There's a question mark there because we haven't identified that, but just as a suggestion, as a starting point, and literally just moved the language out, updated that first subdivision 1 paragraph for clarity. But in reality, it's very few single digits. As I stated, probably 1. So would be best to pull that section out and put it somewhere else in the meantime, in knowing that in the next contract or 2, it won't be relevant likely. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and the signature page is number 5 for general language. Although Karen and I didn't sit down and necessarily agree, it's a combination, and we talked through it for consideration by both teams. Generic language, Article 5, employer rights and obligations, just talking about how we post vacancies and where they're posted and where they're accessible. Since the inception of the language, hiring practices as a whole have changed. How we do hiring in school districts has changed. So during the months of June, July, and August, the posting of vacancies will be done in human resources and at the buildings. Outside of summer school, generally there are people in the buildings. They're going to have more access electronically, which is where we post. So we're recommending that that language be taken out and that we add, that they're eligible on district website and extranet. Section 6 was previously in our language change, and that's just about the school year and really addressing what has been the process, that our normal school year consists of up to 177 teaching days. I can speak for Brandon and I in particular that we've never been at 177 student contact days since we've been here. That has been a little more flexible, so we'd like to see that reflected as more what has practice been. Article 7, master contract execution, that was on our list previously. And just to note that there's 2 signed copies, one to the exclusive representative and one is in the district office, specifically in the human resources department. Article 8, publications of the agreement. This was previously in the one presented by the EM team. And in reality, the majority of it is similar, with the exception of we added electronically within 30 days in the last sentence, because generally we're not providing paper copies to all teachers once we're done negotiating the contract. Generally, Human Resources sends a copy of the existing contract. I would, generally isn't appropriate. Human Resources sends a copy of the contract with the offer, so they get that. And although I believe I think we still provide paper upon orientation, and could, but they're getting copies. Karen and I have talked about where it is appropriate to post things and how many clicks it takes to get there. And again, sometimes it's just education on where things are located and making the right connections. We did talk about, potentially it could be in My Demographics, but My Demographics might not always exist, and then we're changing language again. So that is something we can look into and potentially technology can do, but wouldn't want to enshrine it in contract. Teacher reprimands and discipline. And a lot of these we talked about before. It literally is just stating, it's language that said superintendent previously and now says superintendent or designee because there's a certain department who is in charge of that. Article 23, discontinuance of teaching positions. We talked about this one at length at our previous meeting because there were some typos in it. But we pulled out, so A, B, and essentially the language is as it is now, with the exception of changing some of the dates. So C, changing that to September 15th to have additions and changes to the seniority list. The original seniority list being posted in buildings by September 30th, and unless challenged by October 15th, shall be final. Making sure then that a copy is getting to the president of the exclusive representation, and then noting that once prepared, the final list becomes official. The finalized list is posted in each building by November 1st of that year. That gives time for late hires, which I think we saw this year. There was a lot of changes within that first month that made it hard to meet those deadlines. And then there was some duplicative language in F that we covered with the addition of letter E. Article 24, outside experience. Again, this is a superintendent or designee. Article 27, salary lane changes, just takes out old language back to 1990 and 1991 and June of 1989. Extra duty assignments is a superintendent or designee. Travel reimbursement, Article 33 is the same, superintendent or designee. Association leave, we split the difference on this one and added. Am I talking too fast? Sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, the good thing is you'll have time to look at it. So,
That's the way to slow down.
yeah. Well, some of it is the same. I'm trying to spend time on ones that actually have changes. Article 37 is in the request in our last session, we talked about changing that to hours, just because we're not necessarily speaking in days. There's times when we are speaking in days and in hours, so we kept the days but added in the hours, and just recognize that if anything changes, of course, this is language that then has to change. And I think, although we didn't, as a team, bring anything back about Appendix I, as well as some of the conversation last time about an hour versus an hour and a half, just noting that in particular, we're going to have I think, a larger conversation on, and we did not bring that today, but this also ties into that as we talk about hours. Article 38, ESST reasons, were previously presented by you at the session, and we added this into this general document. Sabbatical leave, again, is a superintendent or designee, and then noting that where And I would suggest as a general language change where it says a specific position such as Director of Human Resources, we should have Department of Human Resources on those general in general language, but that's an example of that sabbatical leave. And then as a general proposal, again, we covered this in our section last time, is that all gendered language is changed to gender neutral language, and then removing dates that are irrelevant and changing new dates from 25, 26. So we didn't go through and change all of those, just a note that we'll have to do that, which typically has been understood and not signed off on.
Is there also, I sent this to you rather last minute, but is there also just general agreement that in all places where it refers to days, we can add the date, keep both the days and the hour? Shows up
Yeah, we
everywhere.
can, yep.
Okay,
We that.
okay.
Any questions? We don't have any updates on the MOU, but wanted to acknowledge that we talked about it last time. And you know, as there are MOUs that you generally are going to put forward, because there's action steps you want to see out of those. We'll wait for your group to come forward with what you want to see. Just I would ask, in the lens we will look through them at, is what is the problem we're trying to solve? How do we make it so that both teachers and supervisors aren't meeting just to meet, and that we're looking at again, what are we trying to solve, and that we use the MOU to get to what we're trying to solve. That may look a lot of different ways. Our feedback from the special ed department is that 75% of the meetings felt like we were meeting just to meet, and a lot of times everything's okay. So then, what does that look like from a check-in process, and how do we address those issues that may require a higher priority? How do we identify what may be systems issues that we have to involve different people in, that maybe the supervisors themselves can't support? So in those two in particular, which maybe have I think in the student behavior MOU, we talked a little bit about things that maybe were happening well, maybe they had happened too slowly, or maybe we could refine. So if we could look at that with that lens, and same with that. So we don't have anything today. We're just letting you know that we'll wait for you to present those if you're still interested in how to have that conversation then. And our team as a whole would prefer if we'd prefer to talk with something in front of us. So if we're going to have a conversation about it, let's have a starting off point so we know where you want to go with it. And or if we're going to have a general conversation, let's make sure we know ahead of time so we're prepared to have the conversation. But sometimes it's easier to jump off from here's what we're thinking. It's a request we would have. We talked about a couple other language items in your general review. So Article 12 was about policy review in some committee. We'd like to have a little more time to look at that. Article 17, substitute comp for teachers. We talked a little bit about that. We'd like a little more time because we think there are some other things that are probably connected to that we need to have maybe a really focused conversation on. And then Article 45 in the Jumpstart MOU. We acknowledge that we have to have a conversation about that and what that looks like, and continuing to recognize that it is a separate program with separate requirements, and we'll have to be thoughtful about that. We don't have anything today, but recognize that those came up on your list. And Karen, I think there was one more article that we talked about? Just so that we have it documented so we don't forget.
In my memory, it was 12. Oh, it's the teacher transfer and Appendix G.
Yeah, and that is on our list as well. Just that the language in the contract is the practice, so we maybe need to think about either striking a G and making sure the contract says what we want it to say, because as we looked at it, the first part of Appendix G makes sense and was fixed in line with the contract, but the rest of it feels confusing. So we should talk about that. I think it's important to note that hiring as a whole is a management directive, and we have to have some flexibility in that. So I think we'd prefer that we stick with the contract language and strike Appendix G, but that's the conversation on that one in particular. Yeah.
I think that was kind of our consensus too, is that it seems like if the contract language is clear, Appendix G doesn't feel like it's necessary.
Well, and maybe the new Appendix G becomes the early retirement incentive.
Maybe.
Maybe we found one to assign to it. So, okay, that's good. So the last two things in your packet that we're covering today, one is this document, which is just a resource document and could be a potential HR support document. We did regionally start some unapproved programs and approved programs for lane changes. So this could be added to, and that is noted, but also recognize that I think as teachers find programs, it'd be helpful if they added to this list as well. And we haven't really talked about what that would look like. We just wanted to provide a jumping off start because we realized there was a shift, and having information is helpful. So when this information could be published, and it could be published at any time, the unapproved programs have links to them. The approved programs also have links to them. There's quite a few programs that have non-degree seeking graduate courses and endorsements. And then I think to the point that we talked about last time, sometimes, and I don't know about some of these programs because we have not asked, like NDSU, UND, some of those may allow different credits to apply to a program. And that is a lot to expect out of the HR side. But for teachers to know that, hey, there's a program that I want to look at, that I send an email to admissions and they answer my question, might just be helpful. So we did put that note on there, and we could continue to add to that document because we want it to be helpful. But mainly the approved programs have comments because they either have ed specialist degrees, they have non-degree seeking graduate courses, and some, we just talked about letters training for something else. We then just have someone say, yep, MSUM will provide these credits that can provide, and we'll work on, I think the teaching and learning side is really good about saying, hey, this can be offered for credit. So as long as we make sure that Ashley is on the same page, because sometimes there's some weird things that can confusing, and I think we crossed that today a bit with something else. So that would just be on the HR sites page, likely, and we could share it. But we wanted to show you what that looked like. And then third-party billing data I provided just as we continue to have the conversation on what that appendix looks like. This data was provided in May, so just be aware that our 24-25 data is not totally up to date. So there may be some incomplete data, but I think regardless, it shows, who has the most encounters and who has the most total minutes. In reality, it was under 5 who maybe could bill but did not bill. And there are some further conversations about, social work billing, for example, and how you do that and who supervises it. So it really is a moving target, and it's important. Second page is not in color in the copy, but I will attach it. We'll get it attached in the agenda so that any electronic copies are, but it just gives you an idea from percentage, looking at the numbers on the front, and the most encounters and most minutes come out of PCA. This, of course, doesn't have anything to do with how people get reimbursed for those services because it's different across the board. A PCA is going to be reimbursed at a lesser rate than another position, for example, but it is our the most minutes and the most encounters. SLPs are the most encounters. So we said we would bring that data, so we've brought that just for consideration. We don't have any updates on Appendix B or D, and some of those will have to be working documents. We are looking at extracurriculars, for example, just to make sure everything looks clear and right, and we've got some clarity, and that is work that's going to be had. So for us, that's what we have today.
Anybody have questions before we? All right. Then Jim was nice enough to put a little packet from us on your side of the table. So the front, if you take a look at it, is Article 36, early retirement. And so this relates or stems from legislation that passed in 2022, but that actually started actively January 1st of 25. And essentially what it is the ability to have student loan payments matched by the district by a contribution into the 403B. And so if there is someone who is has an approved, certified, has proof of a student loan payment up to 3% of their salary. Again, that's being paid is being used to repay student loans, can be matched by the district as a contribution to the 403B. So that's kind of a lot to think about. At least we had a lot of conversation about it as a team. And initially, we had some additional language that was in here that, after speaking with one of the vendors, said, this is way too much. It's not going to work well. It could involve people getting more or less money back, and so we nope, we're not going to mess with that. I want to acknowledge that this means additional work for the HR department, the payroll, setting this up so that it will work and collecting the information. So this is just a proposal. I think that this could be a hiring incentive for people who are either have just finished their bachelor's degree, or people who are working on an advanced degree. The option to pay on those student loans and have that matched. Again, the limitation is up to the 3%. So whether it's matching the loan or it's income that is, or contribution that the member is making, or that the person on the contract is making, that the district is matching, it's up to 3%, either or. So indeed, we did not match on what we had in early retirement.
No.
Then if you flip the page, when we talked earlier about changing days to hours and et cetera, that was in Article 37. This is leave change proposals. And what I did is I clumped them together, and I left the subdivision titles in there so that you can kind of follow. Hopefully it kind of makes sense. And then tried to kind of zero in on new language that's added. So the first one is Article 38, which is leave due to sickness or emergency. And we have the Minnesota Earned Sick and Safe Time that's coming up, is becoming active the 1st of January. And so the first section, subdivision 4, rather than adding this as language in a completely different article, I put it in because I feel like it fits with the leave due to sickness or emergency under Article 38. If it feels like it would be more appropriate to put it in a different location, I don't know that we have any opposition to that, but we have to figure out how to include that language. So that language is included under Article 38. and what's included continues at the top of the next page, and then it goes into Article 39, which is parental leave for teachers. And the change comes with, other than the days, including hours, et cetera, change that we agreed to. Subdivision 5 is the school conference and activities leave. That requires employers to allow eligible employees 16 hours of leave from work to attend their child's school conferences and activities, and for each child within a 12-month period. So this is language that comes right from the Department of Labor. What it says in the Department of Labor is that if there's leave available, teachers can be paid for that time, but it's not required that people have paid leave available to be able to take this time to go to a child's conference or school activity. So that's a chunk of language in there. And then under Article 41, personal leave, under Section 1, there are 2 additions that are underlined. That would be additions: teachers who have been employed with Moorhead Area Public Schools for 10 years or more shall be credited with an additional day or 7.25 hours to be used for personal business. And a teacher employed for 10 years or more may accumulate a maximum of 8 days or 58 hours of personal leave. So that's a longevity perk. And then we talked briefly about this at a meeting, so I put it in. The possibility of paying people for unused personal days rather than people using them. And the sort of the incentive thinking for that is, for instance, this year, Mrs. Berg, who is very reliable about coming to work, had personal days that had to be burned or she lost them. And I think this is true for all. I have a personal day. If I don't use it, I'm going to lose it. So I'm going to use it. So the idea of being compensated for those days rather than losing them, or being able to accumulate more of them and then use them at one time, might be something that would keep people from using a personal day when it's just using it instead of losing it. And so there are some limits. Then under limits, rather than licensed staff of 5%, moving that to 8%, and then also not requiring that positions that don't require a sub, not including those in calculating the site percentage. And as you can probably tell, that was a strong ask on our survey. And then finally, the last one, previously, the last proposal, I should say. The document that's in front of you, for at the top it says memorandum of understanding. Previously, we had an MOU for compensation of teachers, coaches, and activity advisors driving students. My proposal would be, or our proposal would be, that we add this to Appendix D, which is the compensation for extracurriculars and et cetera. So the language that's there, with the exception under subdivision 2, which attaches payment to a cell on the salary schedule, the language is the same. It's the language that was taken directly from the MOU and just transfers here. And then section 3 was also an ask that we had on survey from coaches, is that coaches be eligible for reimbursement for meals when they are traveling with the team. And then the final page that you have in your packet is just our list of items for negotiation. And I tried to sort of indicate on there at the end of the item if we've brought a proposal forward, if it's just been a matter of discussion with no proposal, that sort of thing, so that there's some information about what we've already talked through and what remains. And I think Appendix I, which is item number 25, goes together with Article 17, which is kind of what we talked about earlier. And so a lot of these we've had conversation, but when I laid all of that dialogue on you last time we met, but not necessarily with a proposal attached, just as something to think about. Oh, sorry. Julie.
I just have a quick question though before we move on from the list. So when it says salary and benefits, is it all right, like for example, in Appendix B, if we're looking for a rate increase for curriculum instruction, like do you want every single one of those spelled out, or is it okay that that falls under salary and benefits?
Ask that again.
So just as a specific example,
So
like curriculum and instruction, if
Yep.
we ask for an increase in that hourly rate,
Mhm.
is it okay that that falls under salary and benefits, or do you want that more specific on this list?
no, we've already talked about Appendix B and C, so I think anything coming forward we'll have to do some mutual work on. So
Okay, perfect.
I expect that those will go back and forth a few times as usual. Right?
Perfect. Okay, so then it is my turn. Okay, so so first of all, I just want to thank Cam because he's been fielding some of my emails, and I appreciate the information you've been emailing back. I just have a couple of follow-up questions. So the first one was about the compensatory leave, and it's costed against the teachers because it's in our contract. And so here's what I'm wondering. Are the amounts that you sent me over and above what you would already pay for a sub?
We're going to take your questions
Yep.
and we're going to come
Okay,
back after.
perfect. And then secondly, Cam, maybe I'll just have to have you show me because I'm not seeing on the spreadsheet that you shared where that base cell is. And so I'm wondering which number you're using. Is it from fiscal year 24 or just which one you are? Does that make sense?
For the base year.
Mhm.
That'd be fiscal year 25 when we took this snapshot of all of the costs.
Sure. So, but would that have been from a calendar year from February, or however much it had been up to that point in February?
Would have been from July to February.
Okay. So you wouldn't have taken like, does it make sense though that it should have been like the whole year?
When I pull the data, I pull it at a screenshot or a snapshot of time, right? So
Right.
So when I pull all the data for salaries and benefits and everything, I also pull all the extracurricular at that time. And we have to pick a set time. So that's the date that I used.
Okay. Okay. So then maybe if you can just show me where that is
Yep.
later, that'd be great. Okay. Thank you. So the other question that I have actually comes from the annual operating plan. And Cam tried to answer this, but I just still have the question. Like I'm just still not understanding. So on page 14, where it says 24-25 actual, it says that there are 602.4 licensed teachers. And so I'm just wondering when that number was taken, because in February we had 592.35 when I requested the information. And then this spring we had people retire or whatever, and some of them we didn't replace. And so I'm just wondering where the 602.4, um, when that was taken. Um, and then maybe it would just be helpful too if or do we know like exactly how many teachers we have today? Page 14 of the annual operating plan.
Is that the staffing plan? Yeah, so so they're planning from the staffing plan, not necessarily bodies. And you also have to remember that the FTE isn't number of teachers. You could have a lower FTE than you have number of teachers because you have some part-time teachers. So that 602.4 is an FTE number, not necessarily a person number. That makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is bodies,
But
but the
that's
number
our
that
staffing
we're
plan. So even if we reduce that number, that's what we plan for. We often give a number and you may reduce depending on a multitude of factors between when the staffing plan goes in March and when you start school in September. You may add too.
sure.
Yeah. So that's coming from our FTE plan. We run an FTE spreadsheet around December with all of our FTEs on it, who are our teachers, who are our paras, who are our custodians. And then we add them up by FTE. So that would be a 24-25 snapshot. And you're probably looking at, I mean, that's a 25-26 plan that Cam's budgeting.
So I'm sorry, can you just say that again? When was the 602.4?
That is our plan. So so that's a combination of things. We pull our FTEs for the year. And again, FTEs are not bodies. So it's not 602 teachers, it's 602 FTEs.
Well, I understand that. Okay. Yep.
So we pull and we look at our FTEs in preparation for the staffing plan and how many we have and how many we're adding. So that is, or how many we're reducing. So it is based on our actual FTEs and then any adjustments we're making for the next year. So it's the
from
24-25. It's what we
Sure.
plan for 24-25 and then what we plan for next. Yeah.
Okay, so somewhere between when this number was taken and February, we lost 10 people?
Maybe, but that's the number that we have assigned in each building, right? How many people we have assigned at the high school, how many people we have assigned at the middle school, how many we have assigned in special education, all of our support staff, peer coaches, academic support, right? We have all those by name and number and FTE. So if you're pulling, so you're saying you pulled an FTE number? Yeah.
February 18th. Yep. That was our snapshot of exactly how many people we had on that day.
Can you
Right.
clarify on page 14 what number you're looking at?
Sure.
Are you looking at the 25-26 budgeted
No,
number or the
No,
24-25?
if you go across the total licensed teaching staff for the 24-25 actual, it says.
And we go through a list with a fine tooth comb to see who's still here, who we may not have hired, who's on substitute. We'll take that back and talk about it. It's an annual process where we pull actual people and go through our FTE list.
Right. So I just was assuming
But yeah,
since
you
it said actual that there would have been a day that was the actual.
Yeah, and that document is pulled anywhere between December and February 1st, depending on how early we start the staffing plan.
Right. So then if it was
But here, let me clarify that if there are people missing and Cam pulls the report, which is a payroll report on December 15th, we make sure to add where they should be. So if Karen is a mid-year retirement and she doesn't come up on the report, we put that there's an opening in Karen's position. So we're still tracking the FTE.
Sure.
Yeah. So if you're tracking by people and not by FTE, you could see less if you're not replacing people who should have been replaced but aren't listed on your list.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yep, it does.
Yeah. So if we had 5 early retirees and you're pulling a January 1st report, those 5 retirees may not be on your report, but they're in my FTE plan. Sure. Because we're planning for how many we should have and we've planned for.
Okay. So then is the amount of so then back on page 9 where you have the total expenditures, would that be reflective of when those teachers were pulled in terms of like, so the amount of money is reflective of the number of staff that you have? Is it at the same time? Maybe that's a better way to say it.
That's a complex question. Let's try to figure out an answer because we'll be honest, I'm not sure that we'll give you an answer that
Yeah. Okay.
will make sense or that will be, we could give you an answer that makes sense. You may not agree with the method. Let's put it
Sure.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
let us
Sure.
talk about that to help.
Okay. Perfect. That's all I have.
All right. It's 2:49. I would say we have a fair amount to talk about. So I'll check in with you at maybe 20 after 3. Okay.
You go first if you want.
Okay.
We are willing to TA the language proposal. And we agree that with so few people on the retirement, the hired pre 1990, it makes sense to move that to an appendices. However, given that there's more work to do on Article 36, we would hold off a TA of any kind on that. And that's
That's what you
all
have.
we have. That's all we have.
Okay. Okay, here's the language. Do you have we'll need your copy. That's you keep your written copy. Better writing.
I just wrote on mine that we agreed that we're going to continue to have days and add hours. So that's the only thing I added.
Doesn't say Kristen and Brandon are mean.
Not so far.
That's on the other page.
Doesn't say I hate the green of Brandon's shirt. It's my favorite color.
That's a
green.
given.
Okay. A couple of items we talked about. Our response on the 403B deferred compensation, we prefer to hold with our proposal. HR and Business Office has already started the process of exploring the student loan payment, as that's an employee choice in how they make that decision. We would be hesitant to put that in the contract. But just so the group knows that we've already started talking about that. I think as we've looked at moving away from teachers on call and some of the significant changes that have had to happen with payroll and in Ashley's department in particular, that's probably something that's taken a back burner, but we are continuing to look at it and how across the district, across contracts. Leave. Paid family medical, we would look to add statutory language only without the specifics, has been historical practice. And the other piece is at this time, the percentage is identified with statute and will abide with the 50-50 payroll. We've been advised not to add that in the contract because it's stated in statute like other payroll taxes. We would say the same with activities leave. So we didn't present that to you because all of that leave is in one and there's more to talk about with the leave. But we would look at activities leave as a whole, we've been applying because it's in statute as it comes up. So we look at identifying the statutory language as an option for leave without the additional information. And then personal leave, we would have to cost that personal leave proposal for seniority. And we have to also identify the capability within the leave system. And so I think one thing that's important anytime we're talking about leave is once July 1st hits, the system is set up in a way where you identify by contracts. In some ways, you identify people within the contracts and different ways that leave is applied. So sometimes when we look at leave, it can't be immediately implemented because of how Red Rover or our substitute systems, our leave systems are updated. I just want to put that out there. I think it was last summer we made some changes, or the contracts before, and the substitute management and HR department were not very pleased with me when they had to go back and manually add things because it really is on a year by year basis. So I want to keep you updated in those discussions. So we have to cost that personal leave proposal and identify the capability in the system. And though we're not opposed to looking at those not tied to classroom counting towards the percentage, we got to look at that as a whole, and we wouldn't be interested in increasing the percentage, but we are telling you today we'll look at that proposal. We heard the room. Appendix D extracurricular, we would be okay adding driving to the extracurricular. With the current reductions and focus specific to activities also having to reduce, we opposed to section. I did talk to activities in between just to confirm, that this is relatively standard practice, that it's not happening outside of postseason and other districts, but we'll look at that a little further. And then we'd like to keep the driving stipend as an identified cost versus tying it to the schedule. We talked about this last time, particularly because it's an optional and it can't be required, although I know for some programs it makes more sense. This team understands that. But also has to be considered relative to the wage of the bus driver because not everyone on appendix is a teacher. And then as for, yeah.
So I just want to make sure that I clarify what you're saying is that you would prefer to keep it as an MOU.
Nope.
No.
Nope. This team had no problem putting in appendix D, just some of the additions we needed to.
Okay.
Yep. So as we continue to work on those appendices, I think, which again always kind of takes some back and forth, we can work on those. And then to Julie's questions, we at this point would suggest that maybe you have a meeting directly with them and then we report back at the next session, so we make sure that everyone. Okay. Yeah.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, not fast, unless there's no other questions. Okay.
Anybody?
Do you have a question? Agenda wise, I've just been flipping us as we've tended to do, so I'll continue to do that unless someone is opposed to that method. And then our next date is July 17th from 2 to 4, correct? Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Mr. May?
We addressed your